Do you believe in ghosts? Not the kind in movies, but the stories told by those who lived them. People who touched the line between life and death. Who saw things no doctor could explain. Who survived just to tell us what they saw. In the first part of this series, you'll step into stories that are real, documented, archived, with witnesses, with locations, with secrets no one dares to uncover. If you're faint of heart, this is your last chance to turn back. But if you're ready to face what no one wants to believe is real, hit that follow button and tell me, which story will keep you awake tonight? Tonight, the rain outside is falling like tears for forgotten souls. I know a lot of you turn these stories on to fall asleep, but tonight, it might not be a good idea. Please, sit down. Pour a glass of whiskey, and join me on a journey into a story that, once you've heard it, you'll never dare to look at family photos innocently again. This is the story of a forgotten haunting. In the late afternoon of a late March day in 2022, in the secluded town of Havenwood, West Virginia, a man named Ethan Vance went to the police station to report losing contact with his parents. His father, 62-year-old Robert Vance, and his mother, 58-year-old Martha Vance. Both had vanished without a trace. For the police in this small town, missing persons cases involving the elderly were common. They often ended with the missing person being found at a friend's house or in a hospital. This time was no different. The police were quite indifferent to Ethan's report. They felt that cases of two elderly people disappearing at once were extremely rare, and were usually just misunderstandings or, at worst, medical emergencies. They suggested that Ethan's parents had probably just gone on a trip or had some business to attend to without informing the family. They told him to go home and wait for news. But 2 weeks passed, and there was still no news. Finally, on March 16th, still unable to contact his parents, Ethan was forced to return to the police station for a second time. This time, the police acted with surprising speed. Just 2 days later, on March 18th, they discovered a horrifying scene at a rundown apartment complex in the town of Blackwood. In a wall cabinet, they found the heavily decomposed body of Martha Vance. But the tragedy didn't end there. That same afternoon, another report came in from an abandoned warehouse in the rural area of Pangbourne, Ohio. The warehouse manager reported an overwhelming stench that the villagers had noticed for days. When they investigated, they found the body of an elderly man in a refrigerator. DNA tests later confirmed it was Robert Vance. These two horrifying discoveries on the same day pushed Ethan to the brink of collapse. But what shocked him even more was the information in the forensic report. Without question, Robert and Martha had been brutally murdered. Their bodies were covered in so many wounds that forensic experts couldn't determine the exact cause of death. This wasn't simply a murder. It was a prolonged torture session that continued until both victims drew their final breaths. The deaths were determined to have occurred on February 25th. Just 1 day before Ethan first went to the police station. A few residents in Blackwood later recalled that, in the nights before the bodies were discovered, they often heard strange noises from the Vances apartment, like continuous knocking from inside a cabinet, accompanied by desperate whispers, but they couldn't identify the source. They just thought it was the wind or old furniture until the case broke open. A bitter truth emerged: if the police had taken the initial report seriously, they might have collected more crucial evidence, even though they couldn't have saved the victims. However, the investigators seemed unfazed by this oversight. To them, this appeared to be a typical revenge case, and all details pointed in one direction: the perpetrator's identity would soon be revealed by investigating the victim's social connections. The investigation team split into two groups. One investigated the area around the crime scenes for potential witnesses, while the other began examining the victim's relationships. Sure enough, near the warehouse where Robert's body was found, several villagers reported possibly seeing the perpetrator. According to their account, on the evening of February 25th, the day of the deaths, there was an unpleasant odor near the warehouse. Some curious villagers followed the smell to investigate. They discovered a strange man burning a bag behind the warehouse. Logically, burning trash in a remote area isn't a major offense. At worst, it might warrant a warning. However, oddly enough, the stranger fled in a panic before the villagers could say anything, disappearing almost instantly. Although the villagers found this strange, it was dark, and nothing serious seemed to have occurred, so they dismissed it. Looking back, they realized this mysterious man could very well have been the murderer. The villagers told police the man wasn't tall, was somewhat overweight, and judging by his running speed, wasn't very athletic, likely not a local farmer. This lead about the mysterious man was quickly passed to the team investigating the victim's social connections. But a puzzling detail emerged: no one, from family members to neighbors, could recall anyone matching that description. Instead, they all insisted that the Vance couple lived very privately and always treated everyone well. No one could imagine them being involved in such a bloody revenge killing. However, Ethan Vance, the victim's son, had a completely different perspective. As soon as he learned about the burned bag, he suggested that police investigate this as a robbery murder. His reason made the investigators jump. On that fateful morning of February 25th, Ethan had just sold his Bugatti Veyron and had given his parents $400,000 in cash in a bag for safekeeping. Just hours later, they were brutally murdered. And now a stranger was caught burning a suspicious bag. Could this really be just a coincidence? Upon learning this information, police immediately researched the couple's apartment. The investigation results further supported Ethan's theory. There was no trace of the $400,000 or the bag containing it. Checking the victim's bank accounts revealed no unusual transactions involving such a large sum. All signs pointed to this being a premeditated robbery. Notably, information about Ethan selling his car was known to very few people, suggesting the perpetrator was likely someone familiar with the family. However, another strange detail caught the investigators' attention. Why did the killer preserve Mr. Robert's body in a refrigerator in a rural Pangbourne warehouse while leaving Mrs. Martha's body to decompose naturally in the apartment wall cabinet in Blackwood? Perhaps this wasn't simply a robbery. This situation could be explained in several ways. Maybe the killer acted alone and couldn't transport both bodies, or the vehicle was too small, or perhaps they intended to move both but encountered an unexpected situation. However, the investigators opposed a bolder theory. They suggested that leaving Martha's body to decompose naturally wasn't random, it could have been intentional revenge. Compared to Robert, it seemed the killer harbored a deeper hatred for Martha. All clues pointed to one conclusion: the killer must be someone familiar who had a personal vendetta against Martha. But just then, an investigator noticed a major contradiction in the entire story. He asked his colleagues, "When you heard about Ethan selling his supercar, didn't you notice something? He must be extremely wealthy. So why sell the car at this time? When asked about the reason for selling the car, Ethan casually replied, "I have many nice cars." Selling a Bugatti Veyron was simply getting rid of excess. Nothing special. This seemed to be the issue. If Ethan was that wealthy, why were his parents living in such an ordinary apartment? In previous cases, whenever wealthy people lived so discreetly, it was usually to hide something. So was this family concealing some unspeakable secret? With this in mind, the investigator checked the Vance family's background. The findings were startling. The Vance couple didn't just have Ethan as their only child. Ethan had an older brother named Leo Vance. As soon as this name was mentioned, the scattered pieces of the case began falling into place. To the investigators, the fact that Leo's parents became victims of a massacre seemed almost unsurprising. Wondering why? Let me tell you the story behind Leo's name. In 2008, the U.S. fell into an economic crisis that pushed many citizens into financial hardship. During this time, many people turned to the stock market and investment funds as a lifeline, hoping to find a source of income to improve their lives. Leo Vance emerged as a rising star. He quickly earned glamorous titles in the financial world, the Warren Buffett of the new generation, New York's #1 stock trader, America's most experienced investment master. His reputation grew rapidly in New York's financial circles. By 2014, Leo Vance's name had spread beyond investment circles. He became a familiar face on major media outlets, from the National Financial Channel to various television stations. Leo Vance had built a perfect image of a businessman, young, talented, and dazzlingly wealthy. Leo claimed to have graduated from the English Literature department of a prestigious university in Boston. He said during his college years, his exceptional tutoring skills earned him about $4,000 monthly. However, due to his sharp financial mind, after graduation, he didn't pursue an English-related career but went straight into investing. As a result, he achieved a dramatic class jump in less than 10 years. Not only did he buy a mansion in the wealthy Beverly Hills area of Los Angeles with cash, but he also owned luxury vehicles, including Bugatti, Lamborghini, Rolls-Royce, and Bentley. But all of this wasn't what really caught ordinary people's attention. What truly made Leo notable was his apparent dedication to helping common people by freely sharing his investment expertise. He regularly shared his investment secrets on television shows and even helped manage finances for some devoted followers. Just imagine, if a renowned, wealthy, successful person offered to manage your finances, wouldn't you jump at the opportunity? As word spread, many people wanted Leo to help them make money. Faced with this rising investment wave, he reluctantly opened an investment consulting company to handle these matters for more cautious investors who preferred to trade themselves. Leo generously shared lists of guaranteed profitable stocks. The Vance family quickly turned this opportunity into gold. When younger brother Ethan established a P2P lending company to help those who wanted to invest but lacked funds. In a brief period, the brothers accumulated a massive fortune of over $16 million. But behind the glamour of a stock market mogul lay a dark truth no one expected. All investors who trusted him gradually fell into complete bankruptcy. When some victims became aware and began investigating Leo, they discovered a shocking truth: his entire background was fabricated. Not a single detail of his past was real. For instance, he claimed to have graduated from a prestigious university, but in reality, he had never even attended college. His social media posts flaunting his wealth were all fabricated. He claimed he was about to become the distributor for Lamborghini and Bugatti in the US. Upon verification, due to market instability, Lamborghini and Bugatti had never considered establishing a new distributor there. Even more outrageous was when in the summer of 2016, Leo posted on Facebook claiming he had just landed at an airport in China and was preparing to have dinner with a high-ranking official from Jiangsu province. At the time, almost no one questioned this, only feeling impressed by Leo's connections. It wasn't until he was caught and imprisoned for fraud and illegal trading that this story resurfaced online. Chinese authorities were forced to deny the claims, stating that Jiangsu had no such official that Leo had mentioned. Moreover, the Chinese airport photo he posted was simply downloaded from the internet. In short, the entire post was his fabrication. And so, Leo's empire completely collapsed. Unfortunately, the investors he deceived collapsed with him. Thousands of people lost their entire investments, and many were left with enormous debts. Some victims, unable to cope, tragically ended their lives in despair. One could imagine that if Leo hadn't been imprisoned, he might have been killed by his victims. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that some people, unable to take revenge on him directly, might turn their anger toward his parents. However, if this was truly the case, solving the crime would be extremely difficult because Leo had deceived so many people. Just as the police were struggling with this dilemma, the officer who had earlier discovered the contradiction proposed an idea. The reporter, Ethan Vance, had been concealing his brother's identity to hide their past and hadn't told the police about his brother. Now that this veil had been lifted, there was no need for secrecy anymore. Perhaps now he would share more useful information for solving the case. This officer's intuition proved correct. When investigators frankly confronted the truth, Ethan indeed revealed more information, like a dam breaking. He disclosed that after his brother Leo went to prison, although they had returned some illegal funds, the family still retained significant cash and assets. This was why they had to live discreetly, avoiding attention from curious eyes. Moreover, since his brother had been in prison for some time, he initially didn't think his parents' deaths were related to this matter. After these meaningless explanations, Ethan mentioned something strange that made people think. On February 25th, the night of the murders, he had received a message from his mother on a messaging app. His mother said she had just met a successful Harvard graduate businessman named John Kim and wanted Ethan to arrange a time to meet him to discuss potential business cooperation. So Ethan had added John as a contact and planned to chat online first, with the intention of meeting in person if there was potential for cooperation. Unexpectedly, during their conversation, Ethan accidentally clicked the video call button and the other party connected. At that moment, Ethan caught a glimpse of John's round, full face. Initially, this seemed like a perfectly normal occurrence, but the strange thing was, hadn't forensics determined that both victims were murdered on the evening of February 25th? How could Martha have sent messages to Ethan at this point? At this point, there were only two possibilities: either forensics had incorrectly determined the time of death, or the person messaging Ethan was the killer. If it was the latter, this self-proclaimed John Kim could very well be the murderer. The attempt to meet Ethan might have been intended to kill him, too, with revenge against the family as the motive. Therefore, police immediately created a sketch based on Ethan's description and showed it to the villagers who had seen the suspect. Everyone agreed that the person in the sketch looked quite similar to the mysterious man who had burned the bag near the warehouse on the night of the murders. With the suspect's appearance and build now identified, police used this information to check surveillance cameras around the crime scene. They quickly spotted the suspect in street camera footage. When analyzing the surveillance video carefully, investigators discovered a crucial detail. The suspect didn't act alone but had 3 accomplices. However, due to poor image quality, police could only identify and arrest the mastermind, David Kim, the person who had impersonated John Kim to approach the victim's family through the messaging app. Contrary to investigators' expectations of a hardened criminal, David proved quite forthcoming. Immediately after his arrest, he admitted to all his crimes and willingly revealed his motives. But the story he told was even more shocking than his crimes. As police had suspected, David was one of Leo's countless victims. However, unlike most of those who were deceived, he wasn't an ordinary victim. David came from a privileged background, having completed both his bachelor's and master's degrees in the U.S. Afterward, he successfully established a yacht rental company there and thrived for many years. Everything changed in August 2017 when tragedy struck. His business failed, his marriage fell apart, forcing him to return home. After returning home, David planned to use his remaining assets to rebuild his career, continuing the yacht rental business in the Lake Havasu, Arizona area. Unexpectedly, he happened to meet Leo. Since David was looking for investors at the time, Leo, with his wealth and influence, became someone he wanted to impress. As a result, he not only participated in Leo's financial projects but even gave Leo's father $16,000 as spending money. Finally, with Leo's collapse, David, who had returned from abroad hoping to rebuild his life, was also scammed into complete bankruptcy. But since Leo was already sentenced to prison, David couldn't take revenge on him directly and decided to target his family instead. However, due to David's poor physical condition, to ensure safety, he claimed to have hired 3 young men online. David stated that these 3 men were the ones who actually killed the elderly Vance couple, while he only handled planning and crime scene cleanup. Immediately after the murders, the 3 accomplices allegedly flew back to China. Although this temporarily prevented police from arresting all suspects, it didn't affect their determination of David as the primary perpetrator. Therefore, logically, the next step would be the standard trial process. But what investigators didn't expect was that when detailed information about the murders of the elderly Vance couple was reported by the media, it sparked major controversy. Instead of condemning David's brutal actions, the public unanimously voiced support and called for the court to reduce his punishment. This strange reaction led many to question, no matter how despicable Leo was, his parents were innocent, so how could the public be so blind? But the truth behind this reaction was even more shocking. Leo's financial empire was actually a family business where each member played a role in the fraud scheme. His parents weren't merely innocent bystanders but actively participated in management, particularly Martha, the supposedly innocent mother, who regularly appeared on her son's paid channel, using her image as a respectable mother to persuade and lure people into investing in the stocks their family promoted. After the scheme was exposed, Martha was also convicted but only received a suspended sentence and a fine of $4,000. Simply put, the elderly couple were accomplices to their son's crimes. However, when faced with public criticism online, the couple not only didn't apologize but coldly declared that no one in all of the U.S. studies stocks as seriously as our son. implying that convicting Leo of fraud was unjust. Now you understand why public opinion sided with David, don't you? A few neighbors of the Vance family, elderly people who believed in mystical stories, shared that, on those nights, we felt a cold draft pass through their apartment. We even heard eerie laughter echoing from the basement, as if someone was reveling in others' suffering. They said that after the case, they no longer dared to walk past that apartment building. Ah, the blindness of greed, where can it lead people? But the story doesn't end there, my friend. Just when the case seemed to be reaching its conclusion, an unexpected twist emerged. The three accomplices, after returning to China, suddenly posted shocking accusations about David. They said, David was not a financial fraud. He was even more vicious. He deceived us into taking lives. David's previous statements about being only the mastermind while the other three were the direct perpetrators suddenly collapsed. These three individuals revealed the frightening truth behind the murders. Everything began about a month before the tragedy, when David posted a job listing for security guards online. The three young men, attracted by promises of an easy job with attractive pay, applied and were quickly hired. But when they completed all procedures and made the long journey to the U.S., David's first request wasn't normal security work, it was the horrifying task of transporting two elderly corpses to a remote warehouse in the countryside. Fortunately, these three young men weren't foolish. When they discovered they were transporting corpses, they immediately refused David's request and fled back to their country. In other words, the three supposed accomplices were actually laborers whom David had lured from China to the U.S., and they were completely innocent in the massacre. However, the police couldn't hastily believe these accusations. While requesting China's cooperation in extraditing the three men, they thoroughly investigated the group's movements during their time in the U.S. What they discovered supported the three men's testimonies. None of them had received any money from David. In fact, one of them had to borrow $160 from local friends just to buy a plane ticket home. This detail completely contradicted David's claim about hiring them to commit murder. But this discovery led to a bigger question. If David had lied about these three men's roles, was his entire previous confession reliable? Were there other secrets behind the case waiting to be revealed? Following this line of investigation, sure enough, even the revenge-killing story was a lie. David had committed this crime for different reasons. For over a year prior, he had posed as a private detective to approach victims of Leo's fraud, particularly those who had gone to his house to demand compensation, and indirectly gathered information about the current personnel structure and financial situation of Leo's family. He even stalked the parents, installing tracking devices and wiretaps in their car. Moreover, as mentioned earlier, on the morning of the murders, Ethan had given his parents $400,000 from selling the car, and this money eventually disappeared. Some might think that taking the money while seeking revenge was convenient, but why waste it? The issue was the timing was too precise. Could this really be coincidental? Later, police discovered a crucial detail. Ethan's Bugatti Veyron had actually sold for $1.2 million. He had given his parents $400,000, keeping $800,000 for himself. His parents knew about this, and David could have known this information through his wiretapping devices. That's why after the murders, he immediately tried to meet Ethan. The purpose was likely to steal the remaining $800,000. While coordinating to meet Ethan in person, David was also in contact with a broker to prepare for an escape to the Philippines at any moment. Putting everything together, police concluded that David was the sole perpetrator of this crime and his true motive was robbery. Consequently, the Supreme Court indicted David Kim on multiple charges, including robbery, murder, corpse disposal, and illegal trespassing. He was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment in the first trial. Although he appealed in 2021, the Supreme Court rejected his appeal and upheld the original sentence. Notably, by this time, Leo, who had been convicted of fraud, had been released after serving his prison term. Logically, several years in prison and his parents' horrific deaths should have taught him a lesson and led him to reform his life. Unexpectedly, after laying low for a while, Leo resurfaced and began using Bitcoin to commit fraud. After his crimes were discovered, he was arrested again in September 2023. However, this time, he was quickly released on bail. Perhaps the most bitter aspect of this story is that after his release from prison, Leo Vance seemed unaffected by his dark past and his parents' deaths. Using his remaining wealth, he married a female actress, built a family, and enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. He escaped the law, but could he escape the souls of those he cheated? After the case ended, some of Leo's former victims created a separate website, updating information about his life. They said they would never leave him alone. They set up a shrine and lit incense every day, praying for the souls of the victims who died because of Leo to come back and haunt him. This case isn't just a tragedy about greed and revenge but also a warning about how people can lose their humanity for money. Some commit fraud without remorse, while others readily kill for robbery, leaving permanent scars on society. When you step out of the darkness beneath a church, you think you've escaped. But sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't buried underground. It's your own reflection. And the real horror begins when the mirror stops reflecting anything at all. Or worse, reflects someone who isn't you. At around 5:30 p.m. on July 12, 1994, in a peaceful village called Whispering Creek, Utah, a construction worker named John Miller returned home as usual after a day's work. When he entered the house, he found his wife, Sarah, and their 2 young sons missing. Initially, John assumed his wife had taken the children to visit her parents. However, the next day, his neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, shared some strange news. Mrs. Thompson explained that Sarah had borrowed a pair of white plastic sandals from her the previous morning, saying she planned to go to the market. The children, not wanting to stay home, had insisted on accompanying their mother. After hearing this, John instinctively thought his wife must have taken the children to stay at her parents' house after shopping. He quickly ate breakfast and cycled to his in-laws' home. By noon, despite asking everywhere and checking with relatives and friends, John couldn't find any trace of his family. A sense of foreboding began to grow. Worried, John went to the town market to inquire. The locals there said they hadn't seen Sarah or the 2 boys anywhere. At this point, a villager from another town, George, provided crucial information. George said that on the day Sarah disappeared, he had also gone to the town market. On his way home, he had encountered John's 2 sons, Tommy and Andy. The brothers were sitting on a bench by the road. George recognized them and invited them to return to the village together, but the older brother, Tommy, said they were waiting for their mother to return. So, George left and went back to the village alone. Following George's description, John and some relatives went to the market to find the spot where the two brothers had stopped. Although they didn't discover anything unusual, some nearby households raised their suspicions. According to village rumors, these families had members previously involved in child abductions. Therefore, John and others suspected that Sarah and the children might have been kidnapped. After receiving John's report, local police investigated these households. The most suspicious among them was a man named Frank, commonly known as Frank the Butcher by locals. Unfortunately, when police searched Frank's entire house, they found no related evidence or traces. This investigation result deeply disappointed John. He still couldn't understand why his wife and children had suddenly vanished without evidence of kidnapping. Local police could only investigate the case as a voluntary disappearance. However, since people leaving their homes was quite common in the rural area at that time, the local police station couldn't allocate sufficient resources to search for Sarah and the children. Since his family's disappearance, John lost all focus on work. Cycling around searching for them became his primary concern. Each morning in his worried and disappointed state, John even suspected his in-laws might be hiding his family. However, Sarah's family was equally worried. According to Sarah's sister, their family had also searched many times. After more than 2 months of searching, John fell into complete despair. He spent his days drinking to dull the pain, but the heartache wouldn't subside. Devastated by the sudden loss of her grandchildren, John's mother fell ill and passed away 6 months later. John's father was equally heartbroken. Visiting places where his grandchildren used to play daily, hoping to find traces of them. Unfortunately, he fell from a small bridge one day, suffering severe internal injuries that ultimately led to his death. A once peaceful family was suddenly shattered by an unexpected tragedy. As time passed, John gradually accepted that he might never find his wife and children. In his family genealogy book, he made 2 notations about the disappearances for his eldest son, Tommy, 1994. Taken by mother and disappeared, and for his younger son, Andy, 1994, taken by mother and disappeared. One morning, after 18 years, as John was sitting alone under the old bridge where he and his children used to play, he suddenly heard a whisper calling his name. The voice was faint and choked, as if coming from the rushing water beneath the bridge. It was a strange voice, yet John felt a chilling familiarity. Right after that, he unexpectedly received a call from the local police station. The police informed him they might have found his eldest son. John felt both confused and emotional. On September 8, 2012, while working as a laborer in Atlanta, Georgia, John's phone was constantly ringing with calls from relatives. After receiving news about his son, the usually frugal John immediately bought a plane ticket and returned to his hometown in Utah. At the police station in Willow Creek County, Utah, John met a young man named Anthony Reed. John and his family were convinced that Anthony was John's biological son, as his face strongly resembled John's while his chin was identical to his mother Sarah's. Finally, DNA test results confirmed their suspicions. The young man named Anthony was indeed Tommy, John's son, who had been missing for 18 years. However, according to records, Tommy was only 7 years old when he disappeared and had few memories of his hometown. How did he find his way back? Where had he been for 18 years, and what had happened to his mother, Sarah, and younger brother, Andy? According to Tommy's recollections, that afternoon 18 years ago, He and his brother had followed their mother to the town market. Then, a man from a shop inside a road waved to their mother, Sarah, and she followed him inside. Tommy and his brother Andy sat on a bench outside the shop playing while waiting for their mother to return. Soon after, loud music began playing from inside the shop, making the brothers curious enough to go in. There, they witnessed their mother being pinned to the ground by a man. Tommy recalled seeing another man take out a syringe and inject something into their mother's head. At this point, their mother struggled fiercely, but the man holding her down pulled out a sharp knife and stabbed her repeatedly in the back. In the following days, the two brothers were kept in a dark basement under the shop. Although Tommy tried to escape with his brother through a window, they were caught when they reached the courtyard wall. Tommy couldn't remember much of what happened next. He only recalled being put on a train because the journey was very long. He assumed they had been taken somewhere far away. They eventually arrived in a rural area of Salem City, Oregon. After a few days, his brother, Andy, was taken away by a man and never returned. Tommy was soon taken to another man's house named David Smith, who became his adoptive father. To conceal his identity, David gave Tommy a new name, Anthony. However, as Anthony grew older, he discovered David wasn't his biological father. He couldn't remember his birth father's name but recalled that his father used to wear a suit and ride a bicycle to work, while his mother was a hard-working and skilled woman who cooked well and worked in the field. They also raised pigs. Their life was simple but warm. Regarding his real name, Anthony said he only remembered his nickname, Tommy. Since becoming aware of his situation, Anthony's desire to find his birth parents grew stronger. He kept a precious diary with its most prominent page covered in photos from childhood to adulthood, documenting his deep longing for his family. From 2005 to 2008, Anthony specifically preserved these portrait photos, hoping to reunite with his birth parents one day. According to Anthony, after graduating from middle school, his adoptive father sent him to apprentice at a gemstone workshop in Atlanta. Initially, Anthony earned only $300 per month, not enough for rent, forcing him to survive on $2 ramen noodles once a day. He lived in daily suffering, not knowing how many more years it would take to find his birth parents and brother. To find traces of his mother and brother, he drew his childhood memories, including details of his mother's abuse. Though somewhat hazy, the horrific scene remained vivid in his mind. About 3 years later, his adoptive father, David, returned to his hometown in Oregon, while Anthony stayed alone in Seattle, Washington, continuing to work. He saved money while secretly traveling to neighboring states, trying to recover memories of his hometown. Although Anthony covered his rented room's walls with photos of cities, memories of his hometown remained elusive. During the 2012 Thanksgiving, Anthony accompanied a friend to Longmont County, Colorado. While dining at his friend's home, 2 dishes suddenly triggered some memories. Anthony said the Chinese sausage and watercress reminded him of his childhood hometown flavors. He immediately realized his birth parents might be from Colorado. After determining this general direction, Anthony registered on the Find My Family website. However, his story shocked the website's volunteers and its authenticity was initially questioned by the online community. When registering, he used the name Tommy, vaguely remembering his surname was Miller or Taylor. To help the volunteers, Anthony drew his hometown based on scattered memories. In the picture, he depicted a local festival, his deepest childhood memory. Additionally, Anthony drew some scenes from his hometown, his old house was next to his second aunt's house. There was a bamboo forest beside the old house, and behind the house were 2 ponds. As a child, he often fell into them, getting covered in mud. Another vivid memory was a small bridge not far from their house, which he crossed every day to school. Under the bridge was a small stream where he and his brother often caught fish and crabs. Based on these memory clues, volunteers began searching for missing person information across Utah. However, 18 years had passed since Anthony's kidnapping, and many places in Utah had undergone massive changes. It was truly challenging for volunteers to find the exact location based on 18-year-old scenery. To better recall his hometown memories, volunteers took Anthony to Utah to visit several locations. According to Anthony's memory, as a child he often heard his mother mention a place called Old Town, which left a deep impression on him. Based on these clues, volunteers found a location in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, Utah. Along the way, volunteers asked everywhere. They questioned local residents about whether they had heard of a case where a mother and 2 sons disappeared in the early 1990s. Unfortunately, people there all said they had never heard of such a case. Later, volunteers and Anthony visited the town committee and local police station. Although local staff were very helpful, they still couldn't find any family with similar circumstances. After 7 days of continuous searching, Anthony and the volunteers had covered all of Salt Lake City. Each morning they set out full of hope, only to return disappointed in the evening. Since the search for relatives showed no progress, Anthony dejectedly returned to Portland, Oregon. He hoped to get some clues about his kidnapping from his adoptive father, David. At this moment, a middle-aged woman from Willow Creek County, Utah, suddenly called the volunteers. This phone call would uncover a secret buried for 18 years. The caller was Linda, a resident of Willow Creek County and a mother of 2 boys. One afternoon in mid-October 1993, her eldest son, Mark, had mysteriously disappeared after school. Afterward, Linda and her husband searched everywhere and reported to the police but found no clues. For over a decade, she never gave up searching for her son, Mark. While working away from home, besides regularly following missing person news, she also contacted Find My Family website staff and local Utah volunteers. In early September 2012, Linda saw the article about Anthony searching for his family. She thought it might be her son, Mark, and called the volunteers. However, after several inquiries, both parties realized that Anthony seeking relatives in the news might be the son of a Miller family from Whispering Creek Town. Learning this, the volunteers became very excited. They immediately contacted the Whispering Creek Town police station and confirmed that in Juniper Village, there indeed was a Miller family who had lost 3 family members years ago. Then, the police went to John's house. At that time, his sister said that after seeing the photo in the newspaper, she immediately believed the young man in the picture could be her brother's long-lost son, Tommy. On September 11, 2012, in Juniper Village, Whispering Creek Town, people gathered at the village entrance to welcome Tommy home. After nearly 2 hours of waiting, Tommy finally appeared at the village entrance with the volunteers. Although firecrackers exploded loudly on both sides of the village road, Tommy's tears wouldn't stop flowing. Facing his aged father and villagers, he was speechless. His tears seemed to say everything. After completing the family reunion ceremony, John led Tommy into a room and sat down. He took out 2 old photographs that had been carefully preserved for years and showed them to his son. Looking at the childhood photos with his mother and brother, Tommy couldn't hold back his tears. Although the reunion atmosphere was emotional, John had one question he dared not ask Tommy. After calming down from the emotional reunion, John finally gathered the courage to ask the question that concerned him most. He asked his son, "How did your mother leave back then?" Tommy seemed to have anticipated this question. So he took out the drawings he had made and told his father about the horrific scene from 18 years ago. After hearing Tommy's account, John was silent for a few seconds, then said in a deep, determined voice, "Son, I will definitely find your brother and mother. This is my only wish now." Therefore, that afternoon, John took Tommy to the Willow Creek County Police Bureau to file a report. Based on Tommy's account and some materials he provided, the police officers in charge first confirmed the truth about his kidnapping. However, to reconstruct the details of the horrific case from 18 years ago, the police still needed to find more criminal evidence. Since Mother Sarah and Brother Andy were still missing and their survival status unknown, the police decided to first investigate Tommy's kidnappers to trace the entire case. On September 13, 2012, the Willow Creek County Police Bureau sent 2 investigators with Tommy to Salem, Oregon. In a village called Pine Grove in Salem, Willow Creek police found Tommy's adoptive father and asked about the kidnappers from that year. However, David was very cold, saying it had been at least 20 years since he'd seen that kidnapper and he no longer remembered what he looked like. Faced with David's resolute non-cooperation, the case officers felt very helpless. Therefore, Tommy decided to ask other villagers. As a result, most villagers also spoke ambiguously, clearly unwilling to reveal information about the kidnapper. The 2 investigators had to turn to the local police station, requesting them to dispatch officers to assist in the investigation. According to Tommy's recollection, he had stayed in another man's house for some time before his adoptive father took him home. But Tommy didn't know where this man lived or his name. He only remembered the man's house had a loft with something like a small church shrine upstairs. At that time, Tommy was locked in the loft, and he saw villagers frequently coming to burn incense and worship. To find the kidnapper's specific location, local police called David in for questioning again. This time, David clearly showed more cooperation with the investigation. According to his recollection, that year a middleman named Al had approached him, saying there was a child about 6 or 7 years old in nearby Blackwood Village, asking if he wanted to adopt. Then David had followed this middleman to another man's house. David said he paid a total of $850 and took Tommy away. However, unfortunately, this middleman had now developed age-related memory loss and couldn't provide any more related clues. Therefore, police had to take David to Blackwood Village to point out the kidnapper's residence. According to David's recollection, the kidnapper was named James, a local. Compared to that year, although Blackwood Village had undergone many significant changes, after searching house by house, David finally led police to James's house. Over the years, James's house had been rebuilt into a multi-story building, but the small church shrine upstairs remained almost identical to its arrangement from 18 years ago. However, faced with police questioning, James only admitted to Tommy being adopted by David that year. Regarding the kidnapping, he chose to remain silent. To find a breakthrough, the investigating officers decided to first investigate James's social relationships. They quickly made a rather surprising discovery. Through investigation, police learned that James's wife was also from Willow Creek County, Utah, and had also been kidnapped and brought there. According to her statement, over 20 years ago, a man nicknamed Old Man Jones had kidnapped her. Later, she witnessed other children being brought to James's house multiple times. Through further investigation, police quickly identified the real name of this Old Man Jones as George Mason, 58 years old, from Sunnyvale Town, the same hometown as Tommy. Related documents showed that George Mason had previously been sentenced to 6 years in prison by the Willow Creek County People's Court for child kidnapping. Sentenced with him were 2 other accomplices, one of whom was Frank, the butcher, the man John had suspected of kidnapping his wife and children. Based on this connection, Willow Creek County Police believe George and Frank were likely the perpetrators who kidnapped the 2 brothers, Tommy, that year. Therefore, after interrogating James, police quickly arrested George. Simultaneously, they also quickly went to Frank's house. He was now 51 years old. During initial questioning, Frank quickly admitted that the kidnapping of the 2 brothers, Tommy, that year was indeed his doing. However, regarding the whereabouts of Sarah, Tommy's mother, he still hadn't confessed the truth. He only revealed the 3rd suspect was Dave Riley. To quickly apprehend Dave, police immediately went to his residence for a surprise arrest. However, unexpectedly, the cunning Dave had caught wind of the news and fled beforehand. According to Frank's confession, Dave was actually his blood brother, although adopted into a different family from childhood. He had always maintained an unbreakable relationship with Frank's family. Therefore, after searching all of Dave's family's connections, police went to Frank's relatives' homes in the neighboring town. Sure enough, they found Dave hiding there. In the interrogation room, Dave honestly told investigators, "I want to ask for the government's leniency. I'm willing to confess all crimes." Then Dave detailed the entire criminal process from 18 years ago. The time went back to early July 1994. Due to financial difficulties, Dave had gone to Frank's house to borrow money. Unexpectedly, Frank once again proposed the kidnapping plan they had contemplated many times before. Frank told Dave that kidnapping a child could earn them several $1,000s, and this money also sparked Dave's evil intentions. According to Frank's plan, Dave was responsible for observing targets on the street, then luring them to his shop before taking action. However, Dave had observed for several days without finding a suitable target. Therefore, Frank proposed an even more vicious plan. If they saw adults with children, they could kill the adults first, then kidnap the children to sell. On July 12, 1994, Dave saw Sarah leading her 2 sons past Frank's shop. Therefore, Frank actively stepped out to greet Sarah, saying he needed her to deliver a message to someone in Juniper Village. Without suspicion, Sarah followed Frank into the shop. To easily subdue Sarah, Dave first turned the cassette player's volume to maximum to mask any upcoming sounds. Unexpectedly, the cassette player's sound attracted the 2 brothers, Tommy and Andy, to run in. In a bedroom behind Frank's shop, Dave first strangled Sarah and pinned her to the ground. At this point, Sarah struggled violently, so Frank pulled out a knife and stabbed her. After killing Sarah, Frank and Dave locked the 2 brothers, Tommy and Andy, in the basement. About a week later, Frank contacted the human trafficker, Jack. Through Jack's arrangement, the 2 brothers, Tommy and Andy, were put on a train. They first went to New York, then transferred to Salem City, Oregon. As for their mother, Sarah, she had been dismembered by Frank and Dave and finally buried in a vegetable garden behind Frank's house. Around 10 a.m. on February 28, 2013. Police brought suspect Frank to a bicycle repair shop on Main Street in Whispering Creek Town. Around them, local residents had gathered in large numbers, hoping to learn the truth about the case as soon as possible. At the vegetable garden behind the shop, many residents had surrounded the body excavation site. Although Frank had confessed to all crimes, police still needed to find victim Sarah's remains. According to Frank's confession, that year he and Dave had divided the body into 3 bags for burial. In 2008, he had dug up 2 bags and burned them. The burning location was in a corner of the courtyard. To ensure no criminal evidence was overlooked, technical staff meticulously crumbled each piece of dug-up soil. They carefully washed every fragment suspected to be bone, besides some chicken and pig bone fragments. Police also found some important evidence, including a fragment suspected to be a human skull, some ashes from burning plastic bag pieces used to wrap the body, and a rope used to tie the body. However, based on this evidence, technical staff still couldn't prove the victim had been buried in this garden. Their only hope was finding the 3rd unburned bag. But the case had occurred 18 years ago, and Frank said he couldn't clearly remember where the 3rd bag was buried in the vegetable garden. In this situation, the investigation team had to decide to dig about 3 feet deep across the entire garden. As a result, they quickly unearthed a plastic sandal. This sandal had basically melted, with only the sole still showing a bit of white color. By evening, a final black plastic bag was found. Inside was a bag of bones that, when assembled, formed the lower extremities of a human. DNA testing later confirmed these were Sarah's bones from 18 years ago. At this point, the case investigation had results, and Tommy, through his efforts, had brought justice for his mother. However, his brother, Andy, was still missing. To continue tracing related clues, police decided to return to Salem, Oregon. This time, the human trafficker, Jack, led them to the family who had bought Andy that year. However, after deeper investigation, police discovered that Andy had been sold 3 times. According to Jack's confession, he had initially sold Andy to a local named Sam for $1,100. Later, Sam saw Andy constantly crying and felt unsafe, so through another middleman, he sold him at a lower price to a man named Chuck, who then sold Andy to a man named Williams. Through subsequent investigation, police learned that after Andy arrived at the Williams household, he was renamed David Williams. However, when police brought Tommy to the Williams household, David Williams was working in New York. After confirming through photographs, police helped Tommy successfully contact his brother, Andy. On March 20, 2013, Tommy finally found his long-lost brother, Andy, and brought him back to their hometown in Utah after 19 years. The case was finally solved, and the 2 lost sons finally returned home to their aging father, John. If the eldest son, Tommy, hadn't found his way home, perhaps the truth of this case would have remained buried forever. On August 14, 2014, the Salt Lake City Intermediate People's Court issued its initial verdict. Defendant Frank was sentenced to death for the crimes of intentional homicide and child kidnapping. Defendant Dave Riley was sentenced to life imprisonment for the same crimes. Additionally, Frank and Dave were ordered to compensate the civil plaintiffs $7,500. After sentencing, defendants Frank and Dave, dissatisfied with the verdict, immediately appealed in court. On April 20, 2015, the Utah State High People's Court issued its appeal verdict, rejecting Frank and Dave's appeals and upholding the original sentence. On November 24, 2014, another defendant, George Mason, was sentenced by the Willow Creek County People's Court to 11 years in prison and fined $1,500 for kidnapping women and children. The illegal proceeds from his criminal activities would continue to be recovered. After reuniting, Tommy returned to the place where he was adopted and heard that on quiet nights, people could still hear children crying and wailing from Frank, the butcher's, house, especially from the vegetable garden. He knew that was where his mother's soul was still imprisoned. So, every year, on the day his mother disappeared, Tommy would go to the old bridge in his hometown and release paper boats down the stream. On each boat, he wrote a prayer, a promise he would never forget. Because he knew, as long as that promise existed, his mother's ghost would never let go of the people who killed her. Although the family had reunited, they still had to live separately in 3 different places, because the beautiful days from 18 years ago could never return. Some mirrors don't reflect your image, and some places carve your soul. You might look into a mirror and forget who you are. But in the next story, your very shape will be captured, and your soul may no longer belong to you. On a fateful afternoon in August 1967, residents of the South Side District in Chicago witnessed a startling scene. A man drenched in sweat burst into the local police station. His name was Jack Thompson, and between labored breaths, he began telling a story that would leave every officer in the station stunned. "Last night, I was forced to help bury 2 bodies," Thompson blurted out, immediately drawing the officers' full attention. As his story unfolded, a horrifying crime came to light at Clayton Art Garden, a mannequin factory located at 51 King Road. The owner, Daniel Wong, had murdered both his wife and an apprentice. Thompson claimed he had been coerced into helping dispose of the bodies, which were now buried in the factory's basement. Initially, the police were skeptical of this bizarre claim. The idea of real bodies being buried in a factory that made artificial ones seemed like something out of a horror movie. Moreover, King Road was in one of Chicago's busiest commercial districts. Who would dare commit murder and conceal bodies in such a crowded area? What made the officers even more suspicious was Thompson's behavior. For someone claiming to be an accomplice, he seemed unusually eager to confess. The officers also noticed something odd about his demeanor. He didn't seem entirely mentally stable. Despite their doubts, the police had to investigate. They brought Thompson to Clayton Art Garden, a 4-story building. A beauty salon was on the 2nd floor, residential apartments on the 3rd and 4th floors, and the mannequin factory occupied both the ground floor and basement. According to neighboring businesses, the factory was highly successful, supplying mannequins to fashion stores throughout the U.S. They operated almost constantly, rarely closing even on holidays. That's why it struck everyone as odd when 2 days earlier, owner Daniel Wong had suddenly announced the factory would be closed, posting a "Closed today" sign on the door, something completely out of character. When the investigation team arrived, several reporters were already on scene. After repeatedly knocking with no response, the police were forced to break down the door. As soon as the door gave way, police and reporters flooded into the building. The ground floor featured a display window containing 6 plastic mannequins. Though officers thoroughly searched this level, they found no blood stains or signs of struggle on the main floor. Finding nothing on the main floor, the group descended to the basement, where Thompson claimed the bodies were buried. The scene that greeted them was unsettling. Dismembered mannequin parts scattered everywhere, arms, legs, heads, and torsos strewn about, while the air was thick with the pungent smell of isoamyl alcohol used in mannequin production. One strange thing was that, despite having no heat source, the basement was unusually cold. The scattered mannequins seemed to be staring at them with empty eyes. The chemical smell was not just unpleasant, it seemed to cling to their skin, creating a chilling sensation. Some officers could have sworn they heard faint whispers from somewhere in the room, like the voices of people begging to be freed but trapped in an invisible space. Faced with this eerie tableau, police began to theorize that Thompson might have been affected by the toxic environment. The combination of harsh chemical fumes and the grotesque appearance of the disassembled mannequins could have caused him to hallucinate, mistaking plastic parts for human remains. However, Thompson, his body trembling, insisted on pointing to a specific section of the concrete floor, maintaining that the bodies were buried beneath. Initially, the floor showed no obvious signs of having been disturbed. But while everyone was still puzzling over this, one detective made a crucial discovery in the bathroom. A pile of what appeared to be freshly excavated soil. Additionally, under the display case upstairs, they found cement and fine sand, materials that had nothing to do with mannequin production and were typically only found at construction sites. When these discoveries were cross-referenced with Thompson's testimony, investigators began to suspect his story might have merit after all. The police decided to excavate the concrete floor, bringing in 4 more auxiliary workers with specialized equipment to handle the task. Almost immediately, they found something disturbing. The steel reinforcement bars beneath the concrete had been deliberately cut. Then, at about 8 inches deep, they made a chilling discovery: a fabric glove. The atmosphere at the scene grew increasingly tense. As they reached a depth of roughly 20 to 28 inches, the workers encountered something unusual. When they lifted it out, they realized it was human hair. Immediately after, the unmistakable odor of decomposition filled the air, confirming the investigators' worst fears: there were indeed bodies buried under the floor. From this point on, the excavation proceeded with extreme caution to preserve evidence and protect the integrity of any remains for future forensic examination. At 11 p.m., they uncovered the first body, a woman with no visible external injuries. Just 30 minutes later, they found the second body, a male. Unlike the first victim, this body showed clear signs of violence. The face and body were bruised and swollen, with distinct strangulation marks on the neck. The bodies had been stacked in the pit, with the female victim placed on top of the male. Fortunately, both victims' faces were intact enough for identification, confirming Thompson's story. The female victim was Anna, Daniel's wife, and the male was Michael Clark, an apprentice at the factory. The medical examiner's report revealed that both victims had died approximately 2 days earlier, with asphyxiation as the cause of death. However, one peculiar detail caught the investigators' attention: Anna's head had been shaved, and the hair they'd found during excavation was confirmed to be hers. This raised an intriguing question. If Thompson's account was true and Daniel was the killer, why would he shave his wife's head? As police prepared to arrest Daniel, they realized they'd made a critical error in their investigation protocol. Their initial skepticism of Thompson's story had led them to skip securing the suspect before searching the premises. As a result, by the time they confirmed the truth of his claims, Daniel had already fled. Even more shocking were the rumors circulating in the district. Local residents claimed that during the excavation, Daniel himself had been among the onlookers, disguised and watching as police unearthed his victims. In the chaos of the crowded crime scene, officers had failed to recognize him. This revelation was a devastating blow to the police department's reputation. Police immediately issued a wide warrant for Daniel's arrest. To understand the motivation behind the murders, investigators began digging into the backgrounds of both the perpetrator and his victims. Daniel Wong, 31, despite lacking formal education, possessed remarkable artistic talent, particularly in mannequin crafting, and had built a solid reputation in the fashion industry. His wife, Anna, 1 year his junior, had met him at a billiard hall. They had 3 children together, but their marriage had been marked by frequent arguments and tension. The male victim, Michael Clark, was just 18 years old and had nearly completed his apprenticeship when he was killed. The investigation began with interviews of 3 apprentices who were on leave from Clayton Art Garden. While none could explain their employer's motive for murder, they revealed a crucial detail. Recently, Daniel had discovered $2,000 missing and had a violent argument with his wife. The dispute had escalated beyond verbal abuse. He had physically attacked her and shaved her head 3 days before the murders. On the evening of August 3rd, Daniel had abruptly announced he knew who had taken the money and gave all employees a week's vacation. The apprentices had barely begun their unexpected break when police appeared at their doors. Finding the apprentices' information limited, investigators expanded their inquiry to the victims' families, hoping to uncover any underlying conflicts with Daniel. The first stop was Michael's family. They revealed that before his death, Michael had confided that Daniel suspected him of having an affair with his wife and had beaten him. Despite his parents urging him to quit, Michael had insisted on his innocence, believing that suddenly leaving would only intensify his employer's suspicions. Next, investigators approached Daniel's family, hoping to gather more insight. Their conversation with Jane, Daniel's sister, provided crucial information about the family's troubled past. Jane disclosed that 4 years earlier, while Daniel was away for military training, his wife, Anna, had begun an affair with a neighboring pharmacist who had a questionable reputation. What made matters worse was that the pharmacist had convinced Anna to give Daniel a drug that, while not lethal, would render him impotent. During this period, Daniel had noticed severe problems with his sexual function but couldn't understand why. Despite consulting numerous doctors, he found no solution to his condition. A year later, the pharmacist tried to exploit Anna again. This time, he attempted to convince her to work as a hostess at a bar in Hollywood, promising good money. Anna firmly refused, ending their relationship. This incident seemed to be a turning point, making her realize the gravity of her actions. She eventually decided to confess everything to her husband. Upon learning the truth, Daniel immediately reported the pharmacist to the police, resulting in appropriate legal consequences for his actions. However, even after justice was served, the betrayal continued to haunt Daniel. Jane also revealed another significant detail. Before disappearing, Daniel had borrowed about $165 from her. She had given him the money without hesitation. With these new pieces of information, investigators began forming a clearer picture of the case. They theorized that Daniel's trauma from his wife's past infidelity had led him to suspect a relationship between her and Michael. This paranoia could have been the primary motivation for both murders. While this theory seemed plausible, it remained speculative. The police's most urgent task was still locating Daniel. Initially, police were confident about capturing him quickly. They had 3 reasons for this optimism. First, Daniel had no known connections to organized crime. Second, he had fled with only $165. And third, the U.S.'s island geography made escape particularly challenging. However, another complicated aspect of the case demanded attention: Thompson's role in the murders. As both an alleged accomplice and the informant, his motives required careful scrutiny. Why did he choose to confess? Was he truly coerced? Or had he been a willing participant in the murders who later turned informant due to some dispute? To resolve these questions, the police split their investigation into 2 teams. One focused on tracking down Daniel while the other concentrated on interrogating Thompson more thoroughly. During questioning, Thompson provided a detailed account of the fateful night. According to him, around 10 p.m. on August 4th, Daniel had suddenly appeared at his house in a state of distress. Daniel claimed his wife had been missing for 2 days and that despite reporting it to the police, there had been no leads. He said he planned to search for her in San Francisco and asked Thompson to accompany him. Without much thought, Thompson agreed. The 2 men rode a motorcycle to the train station, but once there, Daniel suddenly remembered he needed to retrieve something important from the factory, so they returned to Clayton Art Garden. However, as soon as they entered, Daniel locked the iron gate and revealed the horrifying truth: his wife had done something unforgivable, and he had killed both her and an apprentice. He needed Thompson's help disposing of the bodies. Thompson claimed he panicked and tried to flee, but Daniel threatened him, saying the bodies were under the bed and he wouldn't hesitate to add a third. With no escape route, Thompson said he was forced to help drag the bodies from the bedroom to the basement, placing them in a pre-dug hole. They began filling the hole, a task that lasted until dawn. When daylight broke, Thompson thought his nightmare was over and asked to leave, but Daniel wasn't finished. He forced Thompson to accompany him to buy cement, quick-drying agents, and isomamyl alcohol to refinish the floor and erase all evidence of their crime. While Daniel was busy mixing cement, Thompson seized his chance to escape. Following his survival instincts, he ran straight home and hid in his wardrobe, not daring to make a sound. Daniel searched his house but fortunately failed to find him and eventually left. However, Thompson realized his home wasn't safe. By afternoon, he fled to his brother's house, seeking refuge. Too terrified to explain coherently what had happened, he just frantically urged his brother to call the police. Before his brother could react, Daniel appeared at their doorstep. Thompson was forced to escape through the back door and ran straight to the police station. Although Thompson's testimony seemed credible and was validated by the discovery of the bodies exactly where he indicated, deeper analysis revealed several troubling inconsistencies. The first major discrepancy concerned the physical disparity between the men. Thompson was a blacksmith with a large, robust build and considerable strength. In contrast, Daniel was relatively slight, standing only about 5 feet 3 inches. Given this physical advantage, it seemed implausible that Thompson would be so easily intimidated by Daniel. Another suspicious element was the sequence of events in disposing of the bodies. Digging the hole was arguably the most challenging part, yet Daniel had completed this alone. This raised the question: why would he need help with the relatively easier tasks of moving and burying the bodies? Furthermore, involving an outsider like Thompson seemed counterintuitive. essentially creating an unnecessary witness to his crimes. Confronted with these inconsistencies, police questioned Thompson again. This time, he dramatically changed his story. Thompson admitted he hadn't been coerced at all. The truth was that Daniel had promised him money, and in a moment of greed, he had willingly helped conceal the bodies. However, he claimed that shortly after, his conscience got the better of him, prompting his confession to the police. During their deeper investigation, police discovered that Thompson actually suffered from mental health issues. Years earlier, he had sustained a head injury in a car accident that affected his nervous system. While he could maintain basic daily activity and social interactions, his thought processes and manner of expression were noticeably different from the norm. Furthermore, investigators learned there was a family connection between the two men. Thompson's brother was Daniel's brother-in-law, and Daniel had even introduced Thompson to his wife. Considering Thompson's mental condition and the family ties between them, it made more sense why Daniel might have chosen him for help. However, this also raised a new concern. Given Thompson's mental state, how reliable were his statements? This made finding Daniel even more crucial. He was the key to unraveling the entire case. Police were so confident about catching Daniel that they didn't even offer a reward for his capture. However, as the investigation progressed, things became increasingly complicated. After searching throughout Chicago and expanding their investigation to San Francisco, police still couldn't locate Daniel. Just as they were growing frustrated with the lack of progress, a new development made the case even more complex. A man named Robert Johnson rushed to the police station to report that his wife, Lisa, had disappeared and was likely with Daniel. Robert's family ran a wig-making business and had frequent dealings with Daniel's mannequin factory, which was how the families knew each other. Lisa, 30, was a mother of 5, with her youngest still nursing. Robert had 2 reasons to suspect his wife's disappearance was connected to Daniel. First, they had disappeared on the same day, and second, neighbors had witnessed Lisa getting on Daniel's motorcycle before they rode away. Robert feared his wife might have been coerced or even kidnapped. This report opened a new avenue of investigation. When police searched Clayton Art Garden again, they discovered intimate photographs of Lisa among Daniel's belongings. The photos appeared to have been taken with Lisa's consent, suggesting their relationship was more than casual. Further investigation revealed that when Lisa left, she had taken her ID and some cash with her. Based on interviews with her children, police concluded she hadn't been kidnapped or coerced but had willingly fled with Daniel. This discovery made the police's task even more challenging. Now, they weren't just looking for a fugitive murderer but one accompanied by a willing companion. Throughout August, the fugitive couple became America's most talked about story. The public was eager to see them captured and brought to justice. However, their whereabouts remained a mystery. Rumors placed them everywhere, from southern to central states, and even in Florida. Police had no concrete leads. Initially, investigators thought that by blocking their access to bank accounts and preventing family assistance, the $165 Daniel had taken would soon force them out of hiding. Police warnings were published in multiple newspapers, stating that anyone harboring the couple would be charged with aiding and abetting criminals. However, these measures failed to draw them out, leaving law enforcement increasingly frustrated. On August 16, 10 days after the murders, police intercepted a letter from Daniel to his father. The front of the letter, written in English, appealed for sympathy for his 5 children and requested his father give Thompson about $2,000 for living expenses. However, on the back was a secret message in Spanish saying, "Don't give the money." This was clearly a deception by Daniel, taking advantage of Lisa's inability to read Spanish to secretly instruct his father to withhold the money. Instead of delivering the letter, police released its contents to the press through reporters, hoping to create discord between the fugitives. The police investigation had shown that Lisa had been home with her children during the murders and wasn't involved in the killings. They hoped that exposing Daniel's deception would convince her that fleeing with him had been a mistake and persuade her to return home. In addition, the police also let Lisa's husband, Robert, publish an open letter in the newspaper. Robert promised in the newspaper that if Lisa returned, everything would be forgiven. Their eldest daughter also wrote a letter herself, saying, "Mom, my sister and brother are both crying. I miss you so much." However, these efforts did not move Lisa. Daniel and Lisa were still missing. Therefore, the police's efforts had not yet yielded any important clues. Many people began to question the police's ability. On August 24th, with no other choice, the police offered a reward of $750 for anyone who could provide Daniel's location, which could lead to his arrest. However, Lisa's neighbors pointed out that the photo of Lisa released by the police was an old photo taken after the birth of her fifth child, when she looked chubby. In contrast, she had lost a lot of weight. So such photos were of no help at all in the search. The police then revealed another important feature of Daniel, saying that he had a strange disease and needed to drink herbal tea regularly in the summer. This information caused herbal tea stalls across the U.S. to be packed with people, hoping to find Daniel and receive a $750 reward. Since the reward announcement, police had received more than 160 tips, but unfortunately, none of them were useful. Just when everyone thought that the case might become a suspended sentence, on August 30th, there was a dramatic turn. Daniel unexpectedly sent a letter to the United Press Agency. In the letter, he described his difficult life as a fugitive and expressed his strong desire to return to his family. He also emphasized in the letter that he did not intentionally kill his wife, Anna, and apprentice Michael. He admitted to assaulting his wife but claimed that he did not realize that her injuries were serious enough to require emergency treatment, which ultimately led to her death. Daniel also said that if the newspaper published his letter, he and Lisa would turn themselves in to the Criminal Investigation Department the next day. The newspaper published Daniel's letter early in the morning of August 31st. That evening, around 11 p.m., Daniel and Lisa did indeed appear. The two took a taxi to the police station door, held hands, and turned themselves in. From the photos in the newspapers the next day, the two looked clean and tidy, not like they had just run away. Especially Lisa. She clung tightly to Daniel's side. It turned out that during the time they were on the run, Daniel and Lisa had been hiding in a small house near the Shadow Creek police station in China City. Daniel even borrowed a bicycle, wore a conical hat, and sold herbal tea along the road every day. While everyone was waiting at the herbal tea stalls hoping to catch Daniel and receive the $750 reward, they did not expect that Daniel was hiding right in front of them. The two men surrendered, finally making the police breathe a sigh of relief, but the problems of the case were not over yet. When Daniel was questioned, he admitted that he had indeed assaulted his wife, leading to her death due to not being able to receive timely medical treatment. But he firmly denied any involvement in Michael's death. On the contrary, he insisted that the person who killed Michael was Jack Thompson, the person who had initially reported him. Daniel recalled that a week before the incident, on July 24, he discovered that $2,000 was missing from his pocket. Suspecting that his wife had stolen it, he began searching everywhere and found a bottle of perfume in a drawer. He immediately became angry, thinking that this bottle of perfume was a gift from some lover to his wife, thus confirming that his wife must have had an affair. In a fit of rage, Daniel used a rope to tie up his wife, beat her, and interrogated her. Not only that, he also cut Anna's hair to prevent her from going out to meet other people. After this violence, Anna was seriously injured and had to stay in bed. On July 31st, apprentice Michael Clark brought food to the injured owner, Anna. Daniel happened to see the two whispering to each other. He immediately suspected they had an illicit relationship. So he tied up Michael, beat him, and interrogated him. So what did Anna and Michael really talk about that day? According to Michael's family's testimony, when they saw Michael injured that day, they asked what happened. He explained that when he brought food to his boss that day, she secretly told him that Daniel suspected him of stealing $2,000 and beat her every day. If this continued, she would be beaten to death, so she asked Michael to help her seek help from outside. Unfortunately, this whispering conversation was caught by Daniel, causing him to be brutally tortured by his boss. After hearing it, his family advised him not to go to work anymore. But Michael insisted that he was innocent and decided to go back and explain clearly to Daniel. When he confronted Daniel again, in order to prove his innocence, Michael told him that the person who really had an illicit relationship with Anna was not him but Daniel's brother-in-law, Thompson's brother. At this time, Thompson was also present at the scene. Hearing this, he flew into a rage and immediately refuted Michael. "You are the one who has a relationship with your sister-in-law, and you still want to blame my brother?" In a fit of rage, Thompson beat Michael up. To prevent Michael from screaming, he also covered the victim's mouth while punching and kicking. Seeing this, Anna quickly spoke up to stop him, making Daniel even angrier and turning to beat his wife. In the fight, Michael stopped breathing, and Anna died shortly after. Daniel and Thompson realized that they had both committed the murder. So they went to buy digging tools and cement together and disposed of the body together. Daniel admitted that the whole incident from beginning to end was done by him and Thompson together, and he had not killed the person alone. Afterward, he asked Thompson to help dispose of the body. However, he did not expect that Thompson would report it to the police the next day. Daniel recounted that when he saw the police and reporters rushing into the store, he realized that he could no longer hide it. At this time, he hurriedly ran to his lover, Lisa, asking if he had killed someone and needed to escape, wondering if she wanted to go with him. Lisa agreed without hesitation, took her ID card and some cash, and set off on the run with him. After reading the newspaper reports on the case, Daniel felt that the press had reported it seriously, so he decided to turn himself in. He asserted that the truth was not as described in the press. These statements were completely different from Thompson's. Thompson claimed that he only participated in burying the body, while Daniel said that Thompson killed Michael and then the two of them disposed of the body together. However, Daniel's statement also had many unreasonable points. The forensic report indicated that Michael died from strangulation. If Daniel said that Michael was beaten to death, then how should the traces of strangulation on the body be explained? This contradiction became a key point in the subsequent trial. On October 18, 1967, the case was brought to trial by the Chicago District Court. Although Daniel insisted that Anna's death was an accident, the court did not accept this justification. Therefore, Daniel's death sentence was almost certain. The main point of contention in the case was whether the whistleblower Thompson actually killed Michael. In the first instance, the Chicago District Court held that the deaths of Anna and Michael were both caused by Daniel Wong, who suspected the two of having an illicit relationship and had the intention to kill. Thompson was only forced to participate in burying the body, so he was declared innocent and released. However, the prosecutor did not agree with this verdict and appealed. Over the next 9 years, Thompson's verdict alternated between guilty and innocent. It was not until March 16, 1976, that the Supreme Court made its final judgment, declaring Thompson guilty of murder. The decision was based on the fact that Thompson had told other inmates in a Chicago prison 2 sentences, "I wish murder would only be a life sentence," and, because Michael Clark was nosy, "I strangled him." In addition, the judge pointed out that during the course of the incident, Thompson had many opportunities to escape. But he did not choose to leave halfway and only ran to his brother's house after he had finished disposing of the body. The judge thought that if he was truly innocent, why didn't he escape earlier? This showed that he was not completely innocent. Based on these doubts, the court finally found him guilty of intentional homicide and sentenced him to life in prison. As for Daniel, during the 9 years of trial, his death sentence was always upheld and he was executed by firing squad on the 4th day after the final verdict. However, at that time, the public was no longer interested in Daniel's fate. Everyone's attention turned to the woman who had run away with him, Lisa. Everyone wanted to know why a mother of 5 children would abandon her family to follow a man who had just killed his wife and fled. Through investigation, everyone learned that Lisa and Daniel had known each other since childhood and were childhood sweethearts. They shared a common interest in painting, and their personalities were very compatible. Lisa later married Robert, but their marriage was not a happy one. However, a few of the factory's neighbors told a strange story. After the bodies were found, some of the mannequins were taken outside for disposal. But on nights with a full moon, they would hear faint groaning sounds coming from the pile of discarded parts. Some even saw the blurry apparitions of a woman with no hair and a young man standing next to the discarded mannequins, as if they were looking for something. Perhaps their souls had been carved into Daniel's lifeless creations, trapped forever in the mannequin factory. So, after hearing these 3 new stories, can you still believe you're safe? Every town hides a secret. Every painting, every locked door, every old refrigerator may hold something darker than you think. But the nightmare isn't over. In our next video, we'll bring you even deeper. More stories, more truth, and more fear that lives right next to you.